I fixed a stranded stranger's broken car for absolutely nothing and won a $400 million jackpot. My wealthy, entitled brother lost his entire life and freedom trying to forcefully take it. You know, that specific kind of tired that doesn't just sit in your muscles, but actually settles deep down into your bones? The kind of exhaustion that makes your vision blur at the edges and turns your brain into thick, slow-moving mud? That was my baseline. That was just my normal Tuesday. My name is Garrett. I am 29 years old, and for a very long time, I was the official, undisputed disappointment of my family. Let me paint you a picture of what my life looked like before everything blew up. Every single night, from 11 o'clock to 7 in the morning, I was at the massive shipping hub just outside of Dayton, Ohio. I was the guy sorting endless waves of cardboard boxes on a loud, rattling conveyor belt. It is the kind of soul-crushing work where you stop seeing packages and just start seeing blurs of brown cardboard. Your hands get covered in this permanent layer of industrial dust, your lower back screams at you every time you bend over, and you develop a weird sixth sense for knowing exactly which boxes are packed with heavy car parts just by the way they slide down the chute. Then, when the sun came up and normal people were just pouring their first cup of coffee to go sit in an air-conditioned office, my second shift started. I would climb into my beat-up 2004 Ford truck, the one with the cracked windshield and the heater that only worked when it felt like it. During the day, I was the neighborhood handyman. I fixed leaky toilets, patched drywall, replaced garbage disposals, and reshingled roofs in the blistering summer heat. People always told me I had golden hands. They said I could fix absolutely anything that was broken. My family, on the other hand, just said I had absolutely no ambition. It is incredibly funny how the exact same situation looks so completely different depending on where you are standing. But I didn't work two physically destroying jobs just because I loved the punishment. There was a reason, one that my parents conveniently loved to pretend never happened. 5 years ago, my older brother, Preston, decided he was going to be the next big tech entrepreneur. He started a company, blew through his initial cash, and then came to me. He manipulated me, played on my guilt, and practically begged me to co-sign a business loan. $30,000. Of course, the business tanked. Preston filed for some shady corporate bankruptcy that somehow left his personal credit perfectly intact, but dropped the entire $30,000 debt squarely onto my shoulders. And what did my parents do? They sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that Preston's future in real estate was just taking off. They said his credit score was too important, that he needed a clean slate to succeed. They looked me dead in the eyes and told me it was my duty as a brother to take the hit and pay it off, so Preston wouldn't be dragged down. So I did. I worked night and day, grinding my joints into dust, to pay off my golden brother's mistake. I swallowed my pride because of something my late grandfather used to tell me. We would sit in his garage, smelling like motor oil and old wood, and he would say, "Garrett, true character is what you do when nobody is watching." I clung to that quote. I thought doing the hard, invisible work made me a good man. I didn't realize it just made me a convenient doormat. If I was the family mule, Preston was the family racehorse. Preston is 32, and he got his real estate license right out of college. He wears suits that cost more than I make in 3 months of fixing toilets. He has his perfectly whitened teeth plastered on bus stop benches all over the county, flashing that practiced, aggressive smile that basically says, "Trust me while my eyes calculate exactly how much money I can squeeze out of your mortgage." My parents look at Preston like he is the second coming. He is their retirement plan, their bragging right at the country club, their ultimate success story. Me? I am the backup plan. I am the phone call they make when the gutter gets clogged or when the water heater bursts in the basement. And then there was Vanessa. Vanessa and I had been together for 3 years. She was beautiful, sharp, and at the beginning, she seemed to understand me. But over the last year, things had shifted. She started complaining about the smell of my work boots. She started sighing heavily when I was too tired to go out on a Saturday night because I had just worked a 14-hour double shift. Lately, she had been having these long, late-night, career-planning phone calls with Preston. She told me Preston was just helping her understand financial portfolios and market investments. The reality of my pathetic existence really crystallized for me during the 4th of July barbecue at my parents' house. It was a perfect, humid Ohio summer afternoon. The smell of charcoal and expensive steaks filled the air. The string lights were glowing in the backyard. Everyone was laughing. My dad, 3 beers deep, stood up on the patio deck to give one of his classic, loud speeches. He loves the sound of his own voice. He started going on and on about how Preston had just helped them refinance the house, saving them $400 a month. He raised his glass, looking at Preston with tears of absolute pride in his eyes. He talked about how incredibly blessed they were to have a son who understood money, a son who was a real professional. Then my dad paused. He looked over at me, sitting in a cheap lawn chair in the corner with grease stains permanently etched into the lines of my hands. He let out a loud chuckle, pointed his beer bottle at me, and shouted over the music, and hey, at least we got one kid who's good with his hands, right? We will never have to pay a plumber as long as Garrett is around. He's the family's free repair guy. The whole patio erupted in laughter. It wasn't warm laughter. It was that uncomfortable, condescending chuckle people do when they are agreeing with an insult. I sat frozen. I didn't defend myself. I didn't flip the table. I just swallowed the lump of pure acid in my throat. But the worst part wasn't my dad's comment. It was when I glanced over at Vanessa. She was looking at me, and her face wasn't angry or embarrassed for me. Her expression was pure, unadulterated pity. She looked at me the way you look at a stray dog that is too ugly to adopt. It was the look of a woman who had finally realized she backed the wrong horse. I didn't say a word for the rest of the night. I just quietly packed up my truck and drove back to my dark, empty apartment. 2 nights after that barbecue, I was sitting in the cab of my truck in the massive parking lot of the shipping warehouse. It was 2:30 in the morning. My break was only 30 minutes, and my muscles were violently trembling from moving heavy freight for 3 straight hours. I turned on the heater, rubbing my calloused hands together, and pulled out my phone. I don't know why I opened Instagram. Maybe I am just a glutton for punishment. But right there, at the very top of my feed, was a new picture posted by Vanessa. My heart completely stopped. The blood drained right out of my face. It was a photo taken at one of those ridiculously overpriced rooftop bars in downtown Columbus. The kind of place where a single cocktail costs $25 and comes with a sprig of burned rosemary. Vanessa was wearing a sleek black dress, the expensive one she told me she bought for a girls' night out. But she wasn't with the girls. Sitting right next to her, with his arm draped casually and possessively around her waist, was my brother, Preston. They were leaning in close, both of them laughing at something off camera, holding their fancy drinks. But the picture wasn't what killed me. It was the caption. She had written, "Amazing evening with someone who truly knows his worth." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone until my eyes burned. The silence inside my truck was absolutely deafening. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the steering wheel or throw my phone out the window. I just felt this deep, dark, hollow feeling expanding inside my chest, eating away everything else. It was like suddenly seeing a magic eye picture come into focus. Suddenly, all those late-night phone calls about career advice made perfect sense. The sudden changes in her perfume, the times Preston randomly stopped by my apartment when he knew I was on the day shift, the way she looked at me with such pathetic pity at the barbecue. She wasn't just leaving me. She was upgrading to the golden child. She was taking my brother, and he was taking her, and neither of them gave a single damn about the guy paying off their debts in the dirt. I didn't call her. I didn't text her asking for an explanation. What was the point? The evidence was right there in bright, digital colors. I simply opened my phone settings, turned on Do Not Disturb, and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I walked back into the warehouse, put my work gloves back on, and spent the next 4 hours throwing boxes onto the belt with a numb, mechanical rage. I was a ghost. I had no family. I had no girlfriend. I had absolutely nothing but the sweat on my back. 2 days after I saw that picture, the weather in Ohio decided to match my mood. A massive thunderstorm rolled in just past midnight. It was the kind of brutal, angry storm where the sky turns a bruised purple and the rain doesn't just fall, it attacks. It came down in solid, blinding sheets. I was driving home from my shift on Route 35. My old truck's windshield wipers were violently slapping back and forth, completely failing to keep up with the water. The wind was physically pushing my truck across the lanes. I was going maybe 30 miles an hour, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. That is when I saw it. Pulled over on the muddy shoulder of the highway, barely visible through the torrential rain, was an old, faded Buick. The hazard lights were blinking weakly, looking like a drowning firefly. Most people just drove right past. In that weather, at 3 in the morning, nobody wants to be a hero. But I thought about my grandfather. I thought about doing what needs to be done when nobody is watching. I pulled my truck in behind the Buick and left my headlights shining on it. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the storm. Instantly, I was soaked down to my underwear. The cold rain felt like tiny needles hitting my face. Inside the car, clutching the steering wheel and sobbing, was an elderly woman. She had to be in her mid-70s. I tapped on the glass, and she rolled it down just an inch. Her hands were shaking violently. She told me her name was Mrs. Higgins. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Through her tears, she explained that her teenage granddaughter was being rushed into emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix at a hospital down in Cincinnati. Mrs. Higgins was trying to get there, but her front tire had completely blown out. She had no cell service, no roadside assistance, and no strength to fix it herself. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, went back to my truck, and grabbed my tools. Let me tell you, changing a tire in the pitch-black darkness, with semi-trucks blasting past you at 60 miles an hour, spraying waves of dirty highway water completely over your head, is a nightmare. The lug nuts on her Buick were completely rusted shut. They probably hadn't been touched since the 1990s. I had to literally stand on the tire iron and jump on it with my full body weight to break them loose. My knuckles scraped against the wet asphalt, bleeding into the puddles. Mud was caked in my eyes and mouth. It took me 30 exhausting minutes. When I finally got the spare tire secured and lowered the jack, I tapped on her window again. She rolled it down and tried to shove a damp $20 bill into my dirty hand. I pushed her hand back gently. "Keep it, ma'am," I yelled over the thunder. "Just drive slow and get to your granddaughter. Be safe." She looked at me with this incredibly intense expression, studying my soaking wet face. "What is your name, young man?" she asked. "Garrett," I said, already turning to walk away. I watched her tail lights slowly disappear into the rain. I climbed back into my freezing truck, shivering so violently my teeth were audibly clicking. I pulled off at the next exit to get gas and a terrible cup of station coffee just to warm my hands. As I was walking back to my truck, the young kid working the register, a kid named Derek, came running out into the rain. "Hey, man, hey," Derek yelled, holding a small, dry envelope. "That old lady who just pulled out of here, she bought something and told me to run out and make sure the guy in the beat-up Ford got this. She said it was a thank you." I was too completely drained to argue. I took the envelope, mumbled a thanks, and threw it straight into my chaotic glove box, right on top of my expired insurance cards and old fast food napkins. I forgot about it the second I closed the little plastic door. Thank you for watching this story. If you are enjoying it so far, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me the name of the city you are living in right now. Every single comment helps push this video to more people who love justice and karma. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the story. A full week went by. 7 long days of the exact same grinding routine. I sorted boxes until my hands bled. I fixed broken pipes until my knees went numb. I hadn't spoken to Vanessa. I hadn't spoken to my parents. I certainly hadn't spoken to Preston. I was functioning on absolute autopilot, existing on cheap black coffee and pure spite. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was driving between handyman jobs, sitting in traffic on Interstate 71. The radio was on some local AM news station because my truck's antenna was broken and couldn't pick up music. The news anchor's voice cut through the static, talking cheerfully about the massive lottery drawing from the weekend. "Check your tickets, folks," the radio host laughed. "Someone in Ohio is waking up $400 million richer today." Lottery officials have confirmed the single winning jackpot ticket was sold at the Shell station on Route 35 during the massive storm last week. My hands went completely numb on the steering wheel. The air in the truck suddenly felt incredibly thin. Route 35. The Shell station. The night of the storm. I didn't gently merge. I violently swerved my truck onto the gravel shoulder of the highway, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. The guy in the Honda behind me laid on his horn for 10 solid seconds, but I couldn't hear him. The only sound was the rushing of blood pounding in my ears. My hands were shaking so uncontrollably that I could barely pinch the latch of the glove box. It popped open, spilling old napkins and crumpled receipts onto the floorboards. I dug through the garbage frantically, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Finally, my dirty fingers brushed against smooth paper. I pulled out the envelope Mrs. Higgins had left for me. I ripped it open. Inside was a single, folded lottery ticket and a small note written on the back of a receipt. The handwriting was shaky but elegant. It read, "Kindness given freely returns tenfold. I hope this brings you the luck you deserve. Thank you, Garrett." I grabbed my phone, downloading the state lottery app with fingers that felt like thick sausages. The download took 30 agonizing seconds. I opened the scanner, lining up the barcode on the ticket with the square on my phone screen. The screen blinked. Then, digital confetti exploded across my display, accompanied by a bright, flashing graphic that made my brain completely short-circuit. "Congratulations! You have won the jackpot. For $100 million. I didn't cheer. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the air. I physically doubled over, opened the door of my truck, and threw up my cheap gas station lunch right onto the gravel shoulder. When my stomach was finally empty, I sat back against the torn fabric of the driver's seat, gasping for air. For $100 million. It was a number so large it didn't even seem real. It sounded like fake Monopoly money. My mind couldn't process it. But quickly, the shock morphed into something entirely different. It morphed into pure, cold terror. I wasn't just a guy with a broken truck anymore. I was a walking bank vault. And if my family, if Preston and Vanessa, found out I had this piece of paper, they would tear me to absolute shreds to get their hands on it. The very first thing I did was something I had not done in 3 entire years. I called the warehouse manager and told him I was sick. Then, I turned my truck around and drove directly toward the wealthiest, most expensive district in downtown Columbus. I didn't go to a normal lawyer. I sat in my truck and searched for law firms that handled ultra-high-net-worth individuals and corporate mergers. I found a firm called Caldwell & Associates. Their website looked like it was made of solid marble. I walked into their lobby wearing my grease-stained work jeans, heavy steel-toe boots covered in dry mud, and a faded flannel shirt. The receptionist behind the massive glass desk looked at me like I had just crawled out of a sewer. She practically sneered as she asked if I was there to fix the air conditioning. I didn't say a word. I just walked up to her desk, pulled the winning ticket out of my pocket, and laid it flat on the glass right in front of her perfectly manicured hands. I watched her eyes drop to the ticket. I watched her pupils dilate. I watched her throat swallow hard. Her entire demeanor changed in literally 1 second. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner conference room that had a spectacular view of the entire city skyline. The door opened and Mr. Caldwell walked in. He was a sharp, serious man in his late 50s, wearing a bespoke suit and carrying a leather folder. He didn't smile, and he didn't offer me a fake congratulation. He sat down across from me, folded his hands, and looked me dead in the eye. "Mr. Miller," Caldwell said, his voice low and incredibly serious. "Winning a jackpot of this magnitude is not a blessing. For most people, it is a curse. It ruins families. It causes bankruptcies, kidnappings, and sometimes death. My first question to you is this. Who else knows about this ticket?" "Nobody," I replied, my voice raspy. "Not a single living soul." Caldwell actually smiled at that. A tiny, predatory smile. Good. You are already smarter than 99% of my clients. Here is what is going to happen. You are not going to claim this prize under your name. Ohio law allows lottery winners to claim their prizes anonymously through a blind trust. We are going to establish a legal entity. Let's call it the Mill Creek Trust. The trust will claim the $400 million. Your name will never appear on any public record, any news article, or any giant cardboard check. He leaned forward, tapping his expensive pen on the mahogany table. The process of establishing the trust, clearing the background checks, and transferring the funds will take exactly 3 weeks. During these 3 weeks, your life depends on your ability to act completely normal. You cannot buy a new car. You cannot quit your day job. You cannot pay off your credit cards. You must remain exactly who you were yesterday. If the vultures in your life smell blood in the water before this money is locked behind my legal walls, they will try to take it. I signed the back of the ticket, placed it inside a secure vault at the firm, and walked back out into the bright afternoon sun. I was practically a billionaire, and I had to go fix a leaky shower drain at 4 o'clock. Those 3 weeks were the longest, most psychologically grueling 21 days of my entire life. It was a masterclass in extreme paranoia. I went back to work. I stood on the assembly line at the warehouse, my back screaming in pain, throwing heavy boxes while my brain calculated compound interest. I calculated that even after taking the lump sum and paying federal and state taxes, I would have roughly $190 million sitting in cash. At a conservative 5% return, I would be making over $25,000 every single day in pure interest without ever touching the principal amount. Yet, there I was, getting yelled at by a shift supervisor who made $18 an hour, telling me I was stacking the boxes too slow. My daytime handyman jobs were even more surreal. One Tuesday, I was called to fix a clogged garbage disposal in a massive, sprawling mansion in the suburbs. The homeowner, a rich guy in a golf shirt, stood over me the entire time, complaining about how hard it is to find good help these days and reminding me not to track dirt on his expensive rugs. I was on my knees, covered in rotting food grime, nodding politely. Inside my head, a voice was laughing hysterically. I looked at his house and realized I could literally buy his entire neighborhood, bulldoze it to the ground, and turn it into a parking lot without making a dent in my bank account. But the real danger wasn't at work. It was at home. I bought a cheap, heavy, fireproof safe from a hardware store, dragged it into my apartment, and bolted it to the concrete floor inside my bedroom closet. I started sleeping with a heavy wooden baseball bat next to my mattress. Every time a car drove past my window too slowly, my heart would stop. Then, week 2 hit, and the dynamic shifted. Vanessa started texting me again. Not apologies, just casual, sweet little messages. Hey, hope you're having a good day. Miss your face. It was so incredibly fake it made my skin crawl. Preston started calling, too, leaving voicemails about how we should grab a beer and catch up like real brothers. They didn't know I had won the lottery. There was no way they could know. But they're predators, and predators have an instinct. They noticed I was different. I was too calm. I wasn't complaining about being tired anymore. I had this quiet, terrifying confidence that I had never possessed before. The closest I came to blowing my cover happened on day 18. I was doing laundry at my apartment. I pulled my jeans out of the dryer, and a thick, expensive cardstock business card fell out onto the linoleum floor. It was Mr. Caldwell's card. Embossed gold lettering. Caldwell and Associates, ultra-high net worth wealth management and estate law. I froze. I hadn't realized I brought it home. At that exact moment, there was a knock on my front door. I quickly kicked the business card under the edge of the washing machine and walked out to the living room to open the door. It was Vanessa. She was standing there in a tight sweater, holding a cup of coffee, giving me a soft, manufactured smile. The game of cat and mouse had officially begun, and I knew I had to play my role perfectly if I wanted to survive. I opened my front door, and there was Vanessa, standing on my welcome mat. She was holding 2 cups of expensive artisan coffee and wearing a soft, inviting smile that I hadn't seen directed at me in over a year. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her high-end perfume immediately filling my small, dingy living room. It was the exact same perfume I had smelled on her jacket the night she came home late, the night she claimed she was getting career advice from my brother. She handed me a cup of coffee and casually mentioned that she had left her spare phone charger in my bedroom a few weeks ago and desperately needed it back. It was a flimsy excuse. I knew it, and she knew I knew it. But I played along. I pointed toward the bedroom down the short hallway, telling her to go ahead and grab it. As soon as she disappeared into the bedroom, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a secure line call from Mr. Caldwell. This was the call I had been waiting for all week. The final confirmation. I walked over to the kitchen island, intentionally keeping my voice at a normal, conversational volume. I didn't whisper, but I didn't shout. I wanted everything to sound like standard business. "Garrett speaking," I said. "Mr. Miller, it is Caldwell." The lawyer's crisp voice came through the speaker. "I am calling to confirm that the final paperwork for the Mill Creek Trust has been completely processed by the state. The background checks are clear. The anonymity clause is ironclad. We are initiating the transfer of the $400 million windfall this afternoon. The funds will be fully secured in your private accounts by tomorrow morning." I took a deep breath, staring blankly at the peeling paint on my kitchen cabinets. "Understood, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you. And nobody can access this trust without my explicit, physical signature, correct?" "Absolutely no one," Caldwell confirmed. "You are fully protected. Remember our rule. Keep your mouth completely shut until the money clears. Do not change a single thing about your routine." "I haven't told a soul," I replied calmly. "I will see you tomorrow." I hung up the phone. The apartment was completely silent. Too silent. I slowly walked over to the kitchen counter and leaned against it, looking down the hallway toward my bedroom. The door was cracked open just an inch. I stood there, holding my breath, listening intently. A few seconds later, I heard the faint, unmistakable creak of the floorboard right behind the bedroom door. The floorboard that only creaks when someone shifts their body weight while standing perfectly still. She had been standing right behind the door. She had heard everything. The words trust, $400 million, and windfall. A cold, dark wave of realization washed over me. I didn't confront her. I didn't storm down the hallway and demand to know why she was spying on me. I just walked back to the living room and sat down on my cheap sofa, picking up the coffee she had brought me. It was already getting cold. A minute later, Vanessa emerged from the hallway. She wasn't holding a phone charger. Her face was slightly pale, and her eyes were darting around the room, avoiding direct contact with mine. Her breathing was shallow. She looked like a deer that had just heard a twig snap in the dark woods. "You know what?" Vanessa stammered, awkwardly gripping the strap of her purse. "I think I actually left the charger at my office. I am so sorry to bother you, Garrett. I really have to run. I have a meeting." She didn't even wait for me to reply. She practically sprinted to the front door, pulled it open, and hurried down the exterior stairs of my apartment complex. I walked over to the window and watched her climb into her car. She didn't put it in drive immediately. Instead, I saw the glow of her phone screen light up her face. She was making a frantic phone call. I didn't need to be a psychic to know exactly who was on the other end of that line. She was calling the golden child. She was calling Preston. The Trojan horse had breached the gates, gathered the intel, and run back to the enemy camp. The countdown had officially started, and I knew the war was going to arrive at my doorstep very soon. I went in my closet, checked the lock on my fireproof safe, and waited for the vultures to descend. The attack came exactly 2 days later, on a Thursday evening. The sky outside was a bruised, heavy gray, threatening more of that relentless Ohio rain. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift patching a commercial roof, my entire body aching, my hands covered in sticky black tar. All I wanted was a hot shower and 8 hours of unconsciousness. When I walked up the stairs to my apartment, I noticed something wrong immediately. The deadbolt was already unlocked. I pushed the door open slowly, my muscles instantly tensing up. Sitting in my living room, Occupying my cheap sofa and my single armchair was my entire family. My mother and father were sitting close together, trying to look incredibly solemn and concerned. Preston was standing near the window, wearing a tailored navy blue suit that cost more than my truck, his arms crossed over his chest. And standing in the corner, trying to make herself look as small as possible, was Vanessa. They had used the emergency spare key I had given my mother 3 years ago. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I didn't step fully into the room. I stayed near the door. My mother was the first to speak. She put on her best, most theatrical, distressed mother face. "Garrett, honey, please come sit down. We are so worried about you. You have been acting so strange lately. You are isolating yourself. We feel like we are losing our son." My father chimed in right on cue, using his deep, authoritative voice. "Family sticks together, Garrett. When one of us is going through a major life change, we all step up to help. That is what families do." I looked directly at Preston. He had the look of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He stepped forward, reaching into his expensive leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy white paper. He tossed them onto my cheap coffee table with a loud, heavy thud. "Let's cut the garbage, little brother," Preston said, flashing his predatory real estate smile. "Vanessa heard your phone call. We know about the windfall. We know about the trust. We don't know exactly how you stumbled into it, but we know you have come into a massive amount of money." Preston tapped the stack of papers with his manicured index finger. "These are documents for a joint family trust and a full financial power of attorney. I have already highlighted the signature lines in yellow. You are going to sign them today." I stared at the papers, then looked back at my brother. "Excuse me?" Preston sighed dramatically, like he was dealing with a stubborn toddler. "Garrett, look at yourself. Look at your clothes. You are a day laborer. You sort boxes in a warehouse at 3 in the morning. You have zero financial literacy. You have no college degree. If you try to manage this kind of wealth by yourself, you will end up bankrupt and dead in a ditch within 3 years. Lottery winners always destroy their lives. I am a professional. I manage high-value assets for a living. I am stepping in to protect you from your own ignorance. I will be the sole trustee, and I will distribute an allowance to you so you don't blow it all on stupid things." I looked at my parents. They were sitting there, nodding along in agreement. The people who raised me, the people who were supposed to protect me, were actively participating in an extortion attempt, fully believing that their golden child had the absolute right to control my life. They genuinely believed I was too stupid to own my own money. I slowly walked over to the coffee table and picked up the documents. I flipped through them. Irrevocable trust. Full asset transfer. Complete financial surrender. It was legal theft wrapped in the disgusting disguise of family concern. The room was completely silent. They were all holding their breath, waiting for good old dependable Garrett to just roll over and take it, just like he always did. Just like when I paid off Preston's $30,000 debt. I neatly stacked the papers back together, dropped them on the floor right at Preston's expensive leather shoes, and looked him dead in the eye. "No," I said quietly. Preston's fake smile completely vanished. "What did you say?" I said no, I repeated, my voice turning into thick ice. "I am not signing your papers. I am not giving you a single dime. And if any of you ever use that spare key to enter my home again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." I stepped back and pointed to the open front door. "Get out." Preston's face turned completely red. He stepped toward me, his fists clenched. "You arrogant little loser. You think you can handle this? You are nothing. You are the family garbage man. When you screw this up, do not come crawling to me for a bailout." "I have never crawled to you for anything, Preston," I replied coldly. "But you seem to be crawling to me right now. Now, get out of my apartment." They filed out one by one. My mother was fake crying. My father was shaking his head in disgust. Vanessa wouldn't even look at me. When the door finally clicked shut, I threw the deadbolt and locked it. I stood alone in the dark apartment, my heart pounding, feeling an incredibly strange, terrifying sense of absolute liberation. The war had begun. The retaliation was swift, brutal, and entirely legal. Exactly 6 days after I kicked my family out of my apartment, I received a certified letter in the mail. I had to sign for it from a very sympathetic-looking postal worker. Inside the thick envelope was a formal lawsuit filed in the county courthouse. The plaintiff was Preston Miller. The defendants were me, Garrett Miller, and the Ohio State Lottery Commission. I read through the legal jargon, my blood turning to absolute ice. Preston was claiming that our family had a long-standing, verbal lottery pool agreement. He claimed, under penalty of perjury, that we had been pooling our money for years to buy tickets, and that the winning ticket I held was purchased as part of this supposed family syndicate. He was demanding a full 50% cut of the $400 million, plus damages for emotional distress. It was a complete and total fabrication. A lie so massive and bold that it almost impressed me. But in the legal system, a lie doesn't have to be true to destroy your life. It just has to create enough reasonable doubt to freeze the process. And that is exactly what Preston's lawsuit did. The State Lottery Commission immediately froze the payout of my funds pending a judicial resolution. My money went from being 1 day away to being locked in a government vault while lawyers sharpened their knives. I immediately drove to Mr. Caldwell's office in Columbus. I threw the lawsuit on his mahogany desk, my hands shaking with absolute fury. Caldwell didn't flinch. He picked up the document, adjusted his reading glasses, and scanned the pages with a look of mild amusement. Caldwell said softly. The Phantom Family Pool Agreement. This is incredibly common, Mr. Miller. Desperation makes people extremely creative. It is a lie, I said, pacing the floor of his office. We never bought tickets together. We barely even spoke to each other. I know it is a lie, Caldwell said calmly, taking off his glasses. The burden of proof is entirely on him. However, your brother made a massive tactical error. He rushed this filing. When people rush, they leave massive blind spots. I took the liberty of hiring a private investigator the moment you told me about the ambush at your apartment. I wanted to know exactly why your brother was willing to risk a felony perjury charge for this money. Caldwell opened a separate file folder and laid several printed documents on the desk. They were financial records. Your brother, the highly successful real estate tycoon, is completely drowning, Caldwell explained, tapping the papers. His real estate brokerage is facing severe insolvency. He has 3 separate commercial mortgages in massive default. His luxury cars are weeks away from being repossessed. He has completely maxed out over $80,000 in personal credit card debt, mostly from illegal offshore gambling sites. Your brother is not a financial genius, Mr. Miller. He is a degenerate gambler whose house of cards is collapsing in the wind. He doesn't just want your money. He absolutely needs your money to stay out of federal prison for wire fraud. I stared at the financial statements. The golden child was completely bankrupt. The man who had sat in my apartment and called me a simple-minded loser was secretly suffocating under a mountain of his own catastrophic failures. So, what is our move? I asked, looking up at the lawyer. Caldwell smiled, and this time, it was a genuinely terrifying smile. We let him walk right into the courtroom, put his hand on a Bible, and commit perjury in front of a superior court judge. And then, Mr. Miller, we are going to absolutely annihilate him. The day of the hearing arrived 3 agonizing weeks later. The courtroom was heavily paneled in dark oak, smelling intensely of floor wax and old paper. The air conditioning was cranked up so high the room felt like a meat locker. I sat at the defense table wearing the only suit I owned, a cheap, dark gray suit I had bought off the rack for my grandfather's funeral 5 years ago. Next to me sat Mr. Caldwell, looking like an absolute predator in his bespoke charcoal pinstripe suit, calmly organizing his legal pads. At the plaintiff's table sat Preston. He was dressed to kill in a shimmering silver suit, his hair perfectly slicked back. Sitting in the gallery directly behind him, forming a unified wall of family solidarity, were my mother, my father, and Vanessa. None of them looked at me. They sat with their shoulders squared, projecting the image of a deeply wounded, loving family that had been cruelly betrayed by their youngest son. The The judge, a stern-looking man named Honorable Judge Harrison, banged his gavel and called the room to order. Preston's lawyer, a sleazy, loud-talking attorney who looked like a bad television commercial, stood up to give his opening statement. He paced back and forth in front of the judge's bench, waving his hands dramatically. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. "This is a tragic case of greed destroying the sacred bonds of family. For years, the Miller family has maintained a strict, verbal agreement to pool their money and purchase lottery tickets together, sharing a common dream. But when the unthinkable happened, when their collective investment finally paid off to the tune of $400 million, the defendant, Garrett Miller, decided that blood was not thicker than water. He decided to take the money and run, leaving his beloved brother and aging parents in the dust. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to physically vomit right there on the courtroom table. Then, Preston took the witness stand. It was a masterclass in sociopathic acting. Under oath, Preston looked at the judge with tears welling up in his eyes. Real, actual tears. He testified that just hours before the massive storm, he had personally handed me a $20 bill and explicitly told me to buy tickets for our family pool. He talked about how much he loved me, how he had always tried to guide me because I struggled with basic life skills, and how deeply devastated he was by my ultimate betrayal. "I don't even care about the money, Your Honor," Preston lied smoothly, wiping a tear from his cheek. "I just want my brother back. I just want him to honor the promise we made to our family." From the gallery, my mother let out a loud, theatrical sob and dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Vanessa rubbed my mother's shoulder comfortingly. It was a sickening performance. If I didn't know the absolute truth, I would have thought I was a monster. I leaned over to Mr. Caldwell and whispered, "They are putting on a hell of a show." Caldwell didn't even look up from his notes. He just clicked his expensive pen and whispered back, "Shows are for theaters, Garrett. This is a courtroom. And their script is about to run completely out of pages." When it was our turn, Mr. Caldwell stood up slowly, buttoned his suit jacket, and approached the center of the room. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He operated with the cold, clinical precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel. "The defense calls Derek Higgins to the stand," Caldwell announced clearly. The young kid from the gas station nervously walked down the aisle and took the oath. Caldwell established Derek's identity and then got straight to the point. "Derek," Caldwell asked, "do you recall the night of the severe thunderstorm when the winning lottery ticket was sold at your station?" "Yes, sir," Derek answered into the microphone. It was dead quiet because of the weather. Only 2 customers came in. First, an old lady. Then, later, that guy right there. Derek pointed directly at me. "Did Garrett Miller purchase a lottery ticket from you that night?" Caldwell asked. "No, sir. He just bought a black coffee," Derek confirmed. "The old lady bought the ticket. She asked me for a quick pic. She told me to run outside and give it to Garrett because he had just spent half an hour changing her blown tire in the freezing rain. She said it was a thank you gift for his kindness." The courtroom went dead silent. Preston's lawyer jumped up to object, stammering about hearsay, but the judge overruled him instantly. "Thank you, Derek," Caldwell said smoothly. "The defense now calls Mrs. Clara Higgins." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. An 82-year-old woman, leaning heavily on an aluminum walker, slowly made her way down the center aisle. You could have heard a pin drop. When she finally reached the witness stand and sat down, she radiated a grandmotherly authority that commanded absolute respect. Under oath, Mrs. Higgins told the entire story. She described the terrifying storm, her desperation to reach her sick granddaughter, and how I had appeared out of the darkness to help her. She explicitly stated that I had vehemently refused her money. "I bought that ticket with my own $5 bill," Mrs. Higgins stated, her voice surprisingly loud and firm. She turned her head and glared directly at Preston. It was a personal gift of gratitude from me to him. Not to his brother. Not to a family pool. It was for the boy who ruined his clothes and bled his knuckles to help an old woman when nobody else would stop. Preston's face drained of all color. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. His lawyer sat completely frozen in his chair, knowing he had been completely outmaneuvered. But Caldwell wasn't finished. He had one final execution to perform. "Your Honor," Caldwell said, pulling a small flash drive from his pocket. "I have one final piece of evidence to submit. The plaintiff claims to be a loving, concerned brother. However, video evidence suggests a very different relationship." Caldwell plugged the drive into the court's presentation system. A large monitor flared to life. It was black and white night vision footage from a hidden spy camera I had secretly installed inside my apartment months ago, after my expensive tools kept mysteriously disappearing. The timestamp on the video was exactly 45 minutes after I had kicked my family out during the ambush. The video clearly showed the front door of my apartment opening. Preston and Vanessa walked inside. They weren't acting like concerned family members. They were moving like professional burglars. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as Preston frantically tore through my kitchen drawers, ripping open envelopes and throwing my mail onto the floor. The camera caught Vanessa pulling my cheap fireproof safe out of the closet and violently hitting it with a hammer, trying to crack the hinges. It was 20 minutes of pure, desperate criminal ransacking. When the video finished playing, the silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Preston was staring at the blank screen, his jaw literally hanging open. Vanessa had her face buried in her hands in the gallery. Judge Harrison leaned forward over his bench, his face completely flushed with pure anger. He glared down at Preston with absolute disgust. "Mr. Miller," the judge's voice boomed through the speakers, shaking the room. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a display of greed so utterly repulsive. You have committed blatant perjury in my courtroom. You have filed a frivolous, predatory lawsuit to extort money from your own brother. And, as the video clearly demonstrates, you have committed felony breaking and entering." The judge slammed his gavel down with the force of a gunshot. "This case is dismissed with extreme prejudice. The State Lottery Commission is ordered to release the funds to the Mill Creek Trust immediately. Furthermore, I am officially referring this matter and this video evidence directly to the District Attorney's Office. Bailiff, please take the plaintiff into custody for suspected perjury and attempted grand larceny." Two armed officers stepped forward and grabbed Preston by the arms. He didn't even fight. He was completely broken. As they dragged him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, my parents sat paralyzed in the gallery, watching their golden child's entire life evaporate in an instant. The aftermath was completely devastating for them and incredibly peaceful for me. The $400 million, reduced to roughly $190 million after taxes and the lump sum penalty, safely cleared into my heavily encrypted trust accounts the very next morning. Preston did not survive the legal slaughterhouse. The district attorney took Judge Harrison's referral very seriously. Given his massive debts and the clear video evidence, Preston was cornered. He took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 2 years in a state penitentiary for attempted fraud and burglary. His real estate license was permanently revoked, and his failing business was liquidated to pay his creditors. He lost absolutely everything. Vanessa saw the writing on the wall and vanished like smoke. She packed up her apartment and moved to a different state without even saying goodbye to my parents. Good riddance. About a month later, the desperation reached its peak. My parents realized the golden child was gone and they were completely cut off. My mother sent a thick, tear-stained letter to Caldwell's office, begging for forgiveness. She claimed they had been completely manipulated by Preston's lies. She also conveniently mentioned that my father was having heart issues and they desperately needed financial help with the mounting hospital bills. I didn't call them. I didn't visit them. I instructed Caldwell to contact the hospital directly. My legal team set up an anonymous payment system that completely covered my father's medical debts. Not a single dollar ever touched my parents' hands, and my name was never mentioned. I paid the bills, but I built an iron wall around my life. I cut off all personal contact permanently. Money didn't change my family, it just acted like a giant magnifying glass, showing me exactly who they always were. With my new life completely secured, I had to figure out what to do with the money. I didn't buy a massive yacht or a fleet of sports cars. Instead, the very first check I wrote was to buy Mrs. Higgins a beautiful, single-story ranch house right down the street from her granddaughter in Cincinnati. It was completely paid off, with a trust set up to cover her property taxes and groceries for the rest of her life. After that, I established a foundation. We called it the Higgins Gratitude Fund. It operates completely in the shadows. We have a team of investigators who search local news and social media for stories of blue-collar workers, single parents, and strangers doing incredibly kind things for absolutely no reward. When we find them, we send an anonymous lawyer to their door with a life-changing check. We pay off mortgages, fund college tuitions, and buy reliable cars for people who truly deserve a break. It was through running this foundation that I met Nora. She was a social worker we consulted to verify the backgrounds of our grant recipients. She is incredibly smart, endlessly compassionate, and she didn't know I was a multimillionaire for the first 6 months we dated. She thought I was just a regular guy managing a small charity. By the time I finally told her the truth about my wealth, she just laughed, kissed me, and told me to keep my dirty work boots off her clean carpets. I still wake up early. I still like fixing things with my own 2 hands. But now I do it on my own terms. My grandfather was right. Character is exactly what you do when nobody is watching. But what he didn't tell me is that sometimes the universe is watching. And sometimes, doing the right thing in the dark brings you entirely into the light. Looking back at my parents, who stood by and let my brother try to steal my entire life before coming back with their hands out. Am I wrong for cutting them off completely? Should I ever consider accepting their apologies, or did I make the right call? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss another story. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. See you in the next video.